Welcome, everyone. I am Ed Biden. I'm one of the co-founders of Hustle Badger. We provide super practical training for product managers and people who want to master AI skills. And we're very lucky today to have Elisabeth Ling with us to talk about, are your product decisions commercial enough? Now, Elisabeth's got a very long and distinguished product career, stretching back 15, 20 years, something like this, probably longer. And she's now a non-exec, an advisor, but she really cut her teeth at some of the big name tech companies like PayPal, eBay, even Skype, I think I'm right in saying. No, I'm not right in saying. Not Skype.
Let's stick with PayPal and
Not
eBay. That's good.
PayPal and eBay. As she's corrected me before, like that is now like some time ago, and she's done so much since then. It seems almost kind of strange to be referencing those as the big names. So with that, I will get out of the way. I will hand over to Elisabeth and let her talk.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I'm French, so you will hear the accent. Second thing about me, I'm very direct, and I love building products. So I fell in love with the web actually a long, long time ago in 1995. I was an intern in the US, and at the time, a friend interned at Netscape. For those of you who, so I came back to France, finished my studies, and I said I want to work in this thing, the web, and that's how it started. And I've kept that passion going up until today. So what I love to do is to build products, but I also love to do love to build products which are commercially viable. I was brought up in a family. We had one bookstore, converted that into a series of bookstores. So I was told at a very early age that the way you make money in bookstores, if someone comes to buy one book, they need to leave with two books because that's how you have the margin. And that's how I learned upsell. So just to put things in perspective, what I think is really important to me today is to share all of my knowledge so we can have amazing, thriving products built anywhere in the world, but not just in the US, also in Europe or anywhere. And I think that really requires very commercially astute decisions. So this is in this spirit that I'm so happy, and thank you, Ed, for giving the space today. The question to all of you I'm asking is, are your product decisions commercial enough? And why am I, so now here we go. Why am I asking this question? So first of all, you will see I reference a lot of people. I'm always very mindful to give credit to where it's due. I'll share a few thinkers that you will know, but I think these books are important. So first of all, what is the product? What does it matter? Obviously, it's the whole thing. It's not just the software, it's the end-to-end experience. And one of the key influential books for me is Clay Christensen's Competing with Luck, Against Luck. For those of you who know, he's one of the thinkers behind the jobs to be done. But I insist on the book is much more than a framework. And for me, it is connecting you to how do you build something which matters to actually make sense to people, and then you can make a viable commercial company out of it. So if I boil down everything I've done, and after PayPal and eBay, the last 15 years, 1 5, I've done a lot of B2B. So I've really immersed myself in B2B. I really summarize product development into a couple of slides. One is it's the value you create. Secondly, the value you capture. So as product leaders and leaders and anyone in product, I think we have to constantly have these two things in our mind and not solely obsess. I know it's super important about the value you create for the users, but also how you're going to monetize, and the value capture is equally important. Secondly, the other sets of things I obsess about are time to market and commercial impact, because we all know there's so many amazing products which actually are not the winners in their categories. So being really fast is very important. One of the things I was really drilled into my head at eBay Europe was a sense of relentless urgency. And it's a kind of double whammy, right? Not only it's relentless, but it's also urgent. And so I think time and speed is super important, and it's even more important, I think, nowadays with what we can do with AI and coding. But what do you need in order to have this value capture, value creation, you do need vision and clarity. And I think in order to connect your product decisions to greater commercial outcomes, you need to have an extreme clarity in your vision. And some of you may remember that on Lenny's podcast, Brian Chesky made a few kind of got people talking about the role of product management when he reorged Airbnb a couple of years ago. What he meant, and I think his message is very important, is that everyone in the company, not just the product team, but everyone really needs, and especially in B2B, is clarity. And what I put all my efforts into as a product advisor is to make sure that everyone in the company, not just the product team, I don't think product in itself belongs to a team. Everyone has the feeling that they're in that boat and they're all rowing in the same direction and they all have an equally important role to play. So why am I saying all this? Well, I'm trying to now get you into 3 ideas of what I've seen really helps on the ground. I've tested them with now 5 years of product advisory, so I'm confident to say they make a difference. They will probably look to you very simple, and they are simple. So, but I promise that practicing them may lead you to interesting kind of improvements. So the first one is the realization that in B2B, very often, a lack of commercial traction comes from the fact that people and different teams in the company are in the same base camp, but they don't look at the same goal. And so the typical story is everybody's in the tent. It's really cool, it's really fun. But some people in the company are actually refining the gates of that mansion in the middle. And that typically happens in B2B, where you're in contact with the users all the time, because the users are really adamant that I absolutely need that tiny feature. Whereas on the other side, perhaps the sales team have these huge targets and they're looking at the mountain. So the first thing we need to do in order to drive commercial results is to make sure everyone is actually looking at the mountain and we're not refining the mansion, because nobody joined the B2B scale up to actually build a mansion. Everyone bought the dream of the mountain. But in the day-to-day of a B2B company, it's very easy to get trapped into the idea that the mansion in the middle and the refinement of the mansion is what matters. So how do I kind of do with that idea? Well, do something very simple. So that's my first framework, if you want to call it. But first idea I want you to test out. So the first exercise I suggest is you take the annual revenue run rate growth rates, and on purpose in the axis, I haven't put if these are months, weeks, quarters, years, just adapt it to your own circumstances. But I would say first exercise is let's take next 3-4 years. You take what is the growth expected. Secondly, you go and work with your sales team and say, let's imagine we're going to stop building the product with like only P1 bugs fixed. That's it. Nothing else. Would you actually hit your quotas this term, this quarter, next quarter? Typically in B2B, yes. The sales team will say, yes, I can actually hit my targets now, because they never want to depend on the product and tech teams to hit their targets here and now. And gradually, as you can see on the red curve, gradually, as we go forward in the future, the gap between the targets and the, I call as is, widens. I'm going to do it in your way, widens. And so eventually you start to have the competition being ahead, and then you start to lose market share. So this area between the red curve and the blue curve is what I think the equivalent area of product value that commercially the product and tech team together with the others have to actually produce. Now I'm going to complicate that, because in B2B you have a lead time. And ideally, you want to get yourselves out of the situation where your sales team is constantly selling something where not only it doesn't exist, but nobody has any clue how could this be ever built, nor would it be a good idea to build it. So you want to try to bring forward towards you the value. So as product and tech teams, we need to look at not this year's targets, but next year's commercial targets and the year after. So I'm encouraging you to now take this blue curve of the targets and bring it forward to the dotted blue by the lead time. And the lead time is B2B is very often 6, 9, 12 months. So, bring it everything forward by a year. And that's important because very often a company day to day, you're talking about this year's targets. And so if everybody's talking about 5 million, actually you need to be looking at the next year, the 8, the 10, the 15. And that's a very different actually paradigm. And so to make my point really, really clear for today's, I've actually said, this is now, if you bring that forward and you look at all these very thick black arrows, that whole space between the red line at the bottom and the dotted blue, that whole space, you could actually, with mathematical formula, and you can probably see that I love math, you could actually compute how many millions that represents. And it's very important to actually do it even back of the envelope calculation, because then what you do is that you actually compute, and I'll go back to the graph, but then you actually, from that, you compute and you take away the time you need for tech debt. I'm actually very sure. Sorry, I always work when I work with CEOs. I always tell them you don't have 100% of the capacity for new features. I'm very serious about that. You need tech debt. There are things that have to be done. So, but in all, when you have what is left of your tech capacity, you need to compare it against that value you need to create. And so what I do as an exercise with companies in workshops is that we compute in the back of the envelope way, we compute the average commercial value that should be derived per sprint. Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying every sprint is equal. I'm just talking about an average across the year. And it's only a thought experiment. But my realization is that very often when the teams do that for the first time, some teams are missing 1 0, other teams are missing 2 zeros. So they have been so much with very good intentions, they have been so much into the weeds of the refinement of the features of the mansion that they've forgotten that big mountain. And when I ask them, so do you think on average there's a 100K value in every weekly sprint? They're like, no, of course not. We're like, well, how are we going to get to the mountain? So if you had to remember only one thing, I think from today, is that I'm going to stay on this one, which is slightly you as to be commercially savvy in product, we do need to be honest about the size of the commercial traction we need to find. And yes, we can be customer obsessed. Yes, we can put the user at the center. All of that is also true. I'm not asking you to dump all of this. I'm asking you to keep all these two things at the same time in your heads, the value creation and the legality capture, but also be honest with the size of the commercial traction that has to be found. That's strategy number one. And the first time I did this, we actually had a CTO and a CEO, and we came up with that. That's 5 years ago. We're really saying, are we really going to do this? Yeah. Okay. The funny thing is actually, I found it an extremely energizing. Every team with whom I've done this comes out of this very energized, because I believe nobody joins an ambitious company to actually not drive commercial ambition. And people kind of forget it in the day to day from time to time, or they know it and it's a source of anxiety, but it's never really talked about enough. And I've worked a lot in America, and you may be joining in from all over the world. But I can tell you that sometimes in Europe, and I'm making a caricature, we're a bit less at ease with talking about money and talking about dollars and talking about pounds or euros. But we do need to have this in our minds constantly, because that's how you create a commercially viable company, is to realize the commercial traction you're accountable for. So now I'm going to go to the second practical idea. Why am I even talking about all of this? So I'm actually talking about all of this because what we do, product and tech, is costly. And I know everybody is going to tell me it's not really costly anymore. We can vibe code, all of that. The actual cost at the end is still to get in front of users, whether they're B2C users or B2B users, using their time and attention to convince them to use. So even if we may spend less on pure product and engineering, we will spend more on tokens, and actually it will still require a lot of effort to get in front of clients. So I think that the hypothesis that product and technology overall is costly is still valid. And nowadays, with the effort you have to do in terms of AI, more or less, you can actually look at listed companies and look at benchmark, but more or less, we are at the moment in the 15 to 25% of ARR, which is spent as a whole on product and tech. And so that's a substantial amount of the P&L. It's very substantial. So therefore, to be commercially savvy in product development, you have to place informed bets. And I always said, don't tell my mom what I do. I actually do a lot of poker. And, it is, as we all know, and most of you will be very familiar with Marty Kagan, it is about de-risking. So the second idea is not new at all. It's obviously, I'm following here Marty Kagan, but I want to insist, or for me, where his books are revolutionary is on the practice of discovery. And specifically, I combine that with the thinking of Peter Drucker, which is very well known as well. There's nothing so useless as doing efficiently something which should be done at all. So my second realization on training teams on discovery is that discovery is still misunderstood. And it is not about ticking a box of activities you have to do. It is really about tackling the largest risk first. And I would actually point you to, I think it's chapter 6 in Inspired 2.0, where Marty says extremely precisely what he means by discovery. Because there's the difference between people who talk about his books and people who are read them very precisely, because they're actually very precise. And so he describes very well the idea that if you want to do a discovery on, I think it's a farming tech startup, the first step is not to buy drones who are hovering over the fields. The first step is to test commercial viability and see if farmers would buy that data. And so the second thing I think makes a huge difference is the practice of knowing what is risky in this idea and being very honest about only tackling the biggest risk first. And I found this metric quite useful. It comes from this book. Again, I like to quote my references. So if you map out the risk without doing anything else, you map out all your risks and you put them on an axis of if the product 6 months after launch was going to fail, what would it have failed for? Why? So you put that's the axis. The high, it would. This is a risk which is very likely to make this thing fail. So that's the vertical axis. The horizontal axis is more subtle. It's about what do you know about that risk? Do you know a lot? So there's a lot of evidence available. It doesn't mean it's not the probability of the risk, it's the knowledge about the risk. And so what Marty is really saying is you only start with what's in the top right, which is it's very likely this would make this project fail, but also we don't know a lot. And when I say we have to be savvy and it's costly, I say that because every day is very costly, either because the salaries are high or it's just the time to market is going to suffer if we're slow. And so the only way to be fast is to only work on what matters. And the only thing which matters is the biggest risk we know nothing about. And then you chip at the problem, but and you do that daily, of course, but it's much more efficient to only tackle these risks first. And again, these ideas are out there. I'm not inventing anything, but I think sometimes people try to go for perfection, tick all the boxes of all the frameworks. But I think if you cut through really, really completely, The only thing that matters is identifying the right risk you don't know anything about and going for that first. So that's the second idea. And then the third idea, to better align your product decision with commerciality, is to realize that what got you here will take you there. And therefore, I always think of us as, kind of product and tech folks. We like to think of ourselves like this. We're really cool. We have backpacks. We look the mountain. It's really it's actually an amazing endeavor. I mean, I love it. But at the same time, I think we're not drawing enough from lots of areas of thinking. And I always tell people, please stop reading about product management. Go and outside of the world, read about anything, but also read about business strategy, read about music. There's so many things we need to embrace. But specifically, I want to point people to this matrix from the BCG. So very well known. If you have a portfolio of products, so forget software, take any products, like you're in charge of a collection of shampoos, for example. You will have your cash cows, the solid brands you make a lot of margin on there in the bottom left. You'll have your rising stars product. You have your question marks. You don't know what to do about that product. And then what I'm trying to say is actually you can do this at any level. And what working for PayPal or eBay taught me is that we are extremely ruthless in how we deployed squads and how we deployed effort. And it's actually sometimes that's not Elisabeth. It's later on. You would be surprised sometimes of the choices I've made with others, in collaboration, where we kept very sizable products, which are mature products, and were in substantial kind of sizes of revenues. We kept them only with 2 engineers, and that's it. There were no needs for more squads. Yes, it would have been nice to have a squad on that product for sure. But on this other part of the portfolio, which was the star product, we had a competitor arriving, and I needed to absolutely accelerate the differentiation. So I had to find 5 squads elsewhere. And so I think in the mind of the product teams, what's really important is to be constantly very honest and say, is this the best way to put my bets? Is this the best way to continue? Why? And this analogy of poker, I think, is important. And this matrix, I think, is just a way to look at how do you deploy that effort, or the people, or the software cost, and are you deploying it in the way which is cutting across all the noise? And it's because I think we all know, but it's the art of product management is the art of saying no. And so if you want to stay true to that, you need to have a huge list of ideas and work your way through that. But say no a lot in a way that is not arbitrary, in a way which is informed, which is based on risk and hypothesis. So there's a way of saying no. But my observation is that people generally are not ruthless enough, because the typical reality is people fall in love with their solutions, and teams fall in love with their products. And I've put a lot of product kind of in the graveyard. And with teams, we had to shut down products which were loved by the clients. But after 20, 25 years, you have a different product. So it takes time, but the biggest risk is to fall in love with your feature. And actually, nobody cares. You just need to stay in love with the problem. And if you only stay in love with the problem, not with the solution, this becomes much easier, the strategic allocation of squads, because it can be at the squad level, it can be at the day level in your efforts. And so I would encourage you, that's my third idea, I would encourage you to be very, very conscious of how you deploy your time, or your squads, or your multiple squads, whichever the scale you're at, it doesn't matter. It's the same idea that your time is precious. And so in effect, what could be, for example, happening in the B2B is what got you there. So for example, your first phase of product market fit was built on a certain product feature, product line. But that second wave, and I work a lot with scale up, so that second wave of growth, it will not come from that at all. So you'll need to find a way, because you can't exploit your costs. You need to find a way to stay lean and find these new areas of growth. Because back to the curves and the red line and the blue line, the size of the commercial value we are accountable for generally in these B2B companies is the biggest one, because nobody can grow B2B scale up through price increases every year. That's people do that a bit, but that's not how you actually do a kind of 50 to 500 million growth. And then finally, and then we'll stop for questions. I wanted to share three points and 3 points of what I think makes a difference day to day. They may sound obvious, but I really believe in them. First, a problem solving and positive mindset. Secondly, I'm repeating myself, but I think especially outside of the US, I think we need to understand what it takes to work extremely fast. And finally, we're never there. I think again back to marketing, Kangan's book, they're fabulous, but they also at times describe the art of perfection. Because I think what actually really matters is continuous improvement. So let's define each month what we improve on and go on and on and on. It's just a marathon. It's no race. There's no end. And as a conclusion, a way I think for me to explain what good looks like is, as a team, if we look at ourselves as product and tech teams, and I always put all that together. And by the way, I mean designers as well in their data science. So I'm very, kind of let's do that all together. I think, what do you want to be known for? You want to be known for driving client value and commercial revenue. You want to be known for explaining technology clearly and simply and always say, so what and so what. You want to be great team players. You want to take measured risks, but in a very transparent way. You want to know your customers in and out, competition in and out, and you also obviously want to hire well and retain top talent. And if you take these 6 dimensions, you could actually, as an exercise, benchmark your team against those. And some teams, for example, are very uncomfortable, which is why I've put it number 1. They're very uncomfortable with actually what I think is the requirements to drive commercial revenue. They say, no, we cannot have as a North Star metric dollars. I've never said that. I've never said your North Star metric should be dollars, but I said, as a consequence of a great North Star metric and a great product, you have to be able to do value capture. You have to be able to drive commercial revenue, and you need to drive commercial revenue. So that's why I've put it at the top. And just, I would say, laundry list maybe, or my 6 kind of traits I look at when I look at product and tech teams. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. And I'm happy. I think the Q&A is going to be the best. So here we go.
Amazing. Thank you, Elisabeth. I certainly have questions. So maybe I can jump in whilst everyone else is thinking of those. That first thing you were talking about, you had these curves talking about, our product team's building something that's going to add, 100K of value further down the line. And I've seen teams kind of tie themselves a little bit in knots when they first start thinking about this, because they're sort of thinking, well, it's only going to be like maybe 10K next year, but in 3 years' time, it will be 100K. And, our number of customers is going to increase. And, they don't really know kind of what time frame or what basis to be calculating that kind of uplift. You talked about sort of actually just keeping this really simple. Could you give a few more kind of, just really tactical tips about how people should do that?
Yes, of course. So I'm looking for a slide, but I will actually start to answer at the same time. So in the context of B2B, no, okay, I won't. In the context of B2B, I think what's really important to realize, it's a team sport. So you have to, in order to answer your question, you need to sit down with the CEOs, CROs, CMO, the exec team, and you're going to have to agree the terms of that agreement. So, okay, let's all agree we're going to look at a 3-year window. Just agree that. It could be 18 months, it could be 3 years. It doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me is actually in that funnel of starting from lots of ideas and lots of opportunities, the next step for me is, and that's usually where I get people to slow down, is write on a one pager, not 20 pages, but not nothing. What is the problem we're trying to solve? And give us a sense of, is it, again, in the context of B2B, is it something which is mostly drive new acquisition, mostly drive kind of mitigate churn, mostly drive upsell, and usually the fourth bucket is cost efficiencies internally. And then the trick is that then whether you put 200K, 500K, a million, that is agreed with your CRO. So actually, I would want the sales team to be aligned and in agreement that this is the value they think they can derive. And it doesn't have to be precise, by 10%. It doesn't matter. What you're trying to keep it really simple, you're trying to say what it is about: new logo acquisition, upsell, churn mitigation, cost efficiencies. And is it something which is in the order of each company will have their scale. So if it's for a company, a huge impact is 50K, well, that's huge impact is 50K. For another one, that's going to be small. But you need to agree a certain scale because nobody actually really knows. But the point is that you need to gather all the insights you have. And so that as a team with the others, you're aligned that this is a 100K opportunity. So I think rather than finessing, it's more important to be aligned with the other teams, I think is really what I think is very practical. And at the same time, in that same moment, you work with the tech teams to have a very rough t-shirt size, because product management is all about de-risking. So to de-risk, it's not so important to be super precise. It's more important to compare the commercial impact to the t-shirt size, because then you're going to be really rapidly, if you look at, tiny commercial impact, extra large t-shirt size makes no sense, just to the bin. We're not going to even look at this, not even spend a minute. So I think it's this idea of trade-offs that is actually the unlock rather than precision.
Great, thank you. If anyone else has questions, please do stick them in the chat. Otherwise, I have a couple of follow-up questions I will also ask. So I think that's a really interesting point you make there about having this kind of collaboration between sales teams, other commercial teams, and the product team. And this is a bit of a leading question, perhaps, but I sometimes think that product teams are encouraged to go from like feature factory, where they have no input, to a kind of some kind of model where they're working almost completely autonomously on their own, and actually that's almost overcorrecting. And we are talking about something fundamentally different, but not kind of you're looking for like having that product. You're looking to add product input in rather than replace kind of commercial input. Is that something you also kind of see with teams as a problem, or do you see it slightly differently?
No, I see it very much. I think, and I think it's good to talk about. I think there is, I think everyone agrees feature factories as a model is not how you produce necessarily the best products or commercializers for different reasons. So we're not going to go into that. The other end, which I like you were the overcorrecting. I don't really believe in the semi-utopia of let's all be autonomous, because I think in actual fact it's not utopia, but it describes a very specific type of companies in a very specific situation. And so I'm more interested in the journey and making progress on the journey. And so in B2B, my observation of making progress on that journey, the only thing which actually makes a huge difference is the alignment with the other functions. Because a B2B company, a B2B scale up, or from startup to scale up, can only function if you're like in this rowing boat and each team is one of the rowers. And so therefore, I always tell the teams I'm working with, you are a product company. So it just happens we use the same words, but there is a product development function, but you are a product company. Therefore, it's a team sport. And actually, what matters is not that someone comes up with an idea. Like, it doesn't matter where it comes up, but also what matters is that you're fully aligned with customer success, with sales. And as a kind of shortcut to your question, I always say the best thing you can do to product managers who arise is to send kind of ask them to be on secondment to the sales team for 6 months, because they will feel the pain of winning contracts. And you can probably hear, I've started my career selling websites for 4 years. So I think if you haven't rubbed against the difficulty of signing deals, it will be not always easy to understand what the sales team is telling you. And therefore, I think it's really important in B2B to win. And so in a way, it's very important to be, sorry, to finish my sentence. It's very important in B2B to win, to be fully aligned with the other functions, because they all have their own challenges and they all see the world in a different way, but for good reasons, because they are the experts of their functions. And so therefore, I'm slightly uncomfortable with the word autonomous, because we're in this B2B sports, kind of team sport. Where does the autonomy lives? What are we actually saying? Are we actually where I think what these books describe? They describe the whole of a full unit which can actually take to market a product. And so in that context, yes, if we're all in a room working on a good problem, all together thinking go to market, every single aspect of what a B2B company is, yeah, I get that you can be autonomous, but let's not misunderstand what is said in those books. And let's not think the books are saying the product development function can go on their own in a cupboard and actually decide everything on their own. It's not what is meant by those books. Unfortunately, the books are very often misunderstood.
Yeah, absolutely. I see Anna's got her hand up.
Yeah, hi, thanks. This is brilliant. I love it. Thank you, Elizabeth. I wanted to just go back to the previous thing. I had a question about, yeah, I love this kind of, talking with the sales team, with the CRO on the kind of which of the four, is it about upsell? Is it about cost effectiveness or whatever? You might have said this, but do you mean per feature or like overall? Do you want to kind of
Oh, it's a good
agree
question.
a
Yes, for
spread?
sure. Yes, exactly. It's a great question. It's again a company decision, because so if you look, there's something I call product flow, and I can also share the slides with Ed and he can circulate. But I always don't say I don't like processes, but in the end, a little bit of a process always helps a little bit. So there is, and so if you start from an idea and go through to general availability, this process or product flow, you're right, it doesn't necessarily make sense to take every little granular feature through that process. So it's typically a company decision, and I think you have to agree on what is the unit of cost we want scrutiny over. Is it 1 month, one squad? Is it 3 months, three squads? For most people, it's not a day of work of an engineer. Like nobody will take tiny tickets through that. But it really depends on the context, because if you only have one squad of six, that's all you have for the whole year. How you spend 2 weeks of that squad is super meaningful to you. So I think it is a bit the size of the chip you're willing to put on the table, in a way, to take the poker analogy. But you have to agree that with the CEO and if you imagine all these functions, sales and you're all together putting those chips on the table to learn more. So I think that's a joint decision, and it really has to clarify. So usually people end up with it's 1 month, one squad for small startups. For larger ones, it's a quarter of a few squads, if you have a portfolio of squads, a portfolio of products.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Priyanka, you've got a question. Do you want to come off mute and ask Elizabeth directly?
Yes, I can try. Sorry, I'm in a cafe, so there might be a lot of background music, which is why I typed it in. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Elisabeth, for the very helpful session. Lots of things to mull about, but one thing that I was thinking when you had presented the chart about the cash cows, the star projects, one thing which I have experienced is basically when the cash cow is working well and there is money coming in, it kind of gives the excuse to different teams to kind of mask inefficiencies, take a few poor decisions because there is no immediate repercussion. I guess up until now, at least in my experience, we haven't had that blowback from the cash cow kind of running out. But from your experience, how have leadership teams basically responded? Say maybe if there is a sudden decline in the cash cow, and then we have taken all of these redundant decisions with on the side of product and new products areas. And just thinking about product managers, how can we navigate this territory proactively to avoid this kind of a thing and have like a retrospective experience of having to clean things up?
Thank you, Priyanka. It's really, really good. They're good questions. I think I'll start with the end, which is how to be proactive about that. Most often, I don't see enough commercial opportunities on the table being discussed. So actually, you stay in the status quo of the cash cow being kind of given resources because there are no hard decisions to be made. So if you had a list of 20 ideas that are then going through discovery and you end up with, not that I'm suggesting waterfall, but you understand. If you had enough things you wanted to build and they were validated and like, gosh, like if only we could do all this, then it would be very obvious that you could extract resources from the cash cow. There's a very good book, which is called Dealing with Darwin, and it's by Geoffrey Moore. So his other books are more well-known, Crossing the Chasm and all of that. But Dealing with Darwin is exactly on that topic, which is in a large company, I'm going to quote him, but how do you extract resources from core to actually finance innovation? And so you can read that book, but generally my observation is that happens because there are not enough good ideas on the table, which is back to my point that product managers and A need to be with sales all the time, and B need at least, I would say you need at least 20% of your time on the ground, constantly seeing and feeling where are the opportunities. If you are burying yourself in processes and management of processes, you'll never find time. You'll never be able to actually find enough opportunities. And so it's that, I think, that makes the difference. If you look at these two curves and you are looking at, okay, the cash cow is, but okay, go out further in the future. Is it really, really going to drive for us the next 5 years of growth? Sometimes you have to work on a longer time horizon. And in my last role, in Elsevier and Relic, we are working on very long time horizons because it's a very mature product organization. And you do need to be scanning the horizon and finding good. So I think finding good commercial opportunities. So I think for individual product managers, become very savvy about the commerciality of the space, what's going on. Look at adjacent markets. Look at your persona. Am I selling to that person? Who is the economic buyer? Could we sell something else to them? It's it's easy to do. Say, let's do upsell. It's really, really hard to do. Let's do upsell. So it requires a lot of work. And so putting enough ideas on the table which are validated, I think, is where it makes a difference. Because if there's nothing to choose from, then you just continue doing the same thing. But you're asking really the right questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that answer.
Super. Well, I'll just give it a moment. If anyone else has got a question, then please do stick up your hand or stick something in the chat. No, I think that's it.
Good.
Well, thank you, Elisabeth. This was really fantastic. Loved how you think about things in such a commercial way, and loved the really kind of like tactical advice there for how to put that into practice. So yeah, thank you very much for coming to chat to us.
You're very welcome. And, thank you for hosting me. I really care a lot about this message. I think it really makes a difference to companies. So I hope it's useful, and anyone can find me on LinkedIn if you have other questions. And thanks again, Ed. It's been, we've been collaborating in different ways and knowing each other for a long time. So it's really nice to do that together.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, likewise. Super.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye bye.